Well, Labor MP Josh Burns is currently in Tel Aviv with a bipartisan group of Australian politicians who are visiting Israel. Mr Burns is Jewish Australian and he has somewhat pushed back on the Prime Minister's joint statement with New Zealand and Canada, saying a premature peace settlement would only fuel Hamas. But that's not what that statement said. I spoke to him earlier about the conflict in Israel and the prospects of reaching that sustainable ceasefire.
Unfortunately, the thing that I've learned that is the clearest to me is that there is only one way out of this, that is the release of hostages, and that is for Hamas to surrender and to no longer be in control of the Gaza Strip.
Do you think that's going to happen, either of those things?
Well, that's the only way forward, and there has been some breaking of Hamas's command and control systems in the north of Gaza. There has been reports here of Hamas moving further south in the Gaza Strip and also circulating and concentrating around Khan Yunis, which is another city in the Gaza Strip. It's very, very difficult. We know that Hamas embeds themselves in civilian infrastructure. And so to extract a terrorist organisation from that, one where they've had 16 years to build a labyrinth of underground tunnels, it's extremely difficult. So only this morning here in Israel, there was news of a whole unit, I think it was around 11 soldiers, young soldiers who were killed in battle. It's taken its toll on this country by having boots on the ground, but they are very committed to ending Hamas's reign in Gaza, and they are very committed to having their people the hostages returned home.
And what are your thoughts about this joint statement from Albanese and his Canadian New Zealand counterparts calling for a sustainable ceasefire, for Hamas to release hostages, among other things?
Well, I think it went into all of the details that we all know to be true, and there is no future for Gaza, for Hamas in Gaza. They need to be removed from power, and they cannot be in control of the land and the military assets that are in Gaza. The statement also recognised the devastating Palestinian loss of life and humanitarian situation, and I recognise it too, and frankly so do all of the Israelis that we've spoken to here in the last few days. People recognise that it's a shattering situation, that no Israeli were planning on spending this time in Gaza, that this was that they feel a war that they have to fight, not one that they want to fight. And so I think the statements of the Prime Ministers have recognised that there is real complexity here, and that the only way through this is for Hamas to no longer be in charge and for the hostages to be returned. Because the alternative, Laura, is that a country is being asked to leave 130 of its civilians behind, and frankly, no country would even consider that.
Josh, do you deviate at all from that statement, though? And is it contradictory with Australia voting for the UN resolution for an immediate ceasefire?
Well, I've remained consistent throughout this entire conflict, and frankly, I think that I'm on the same page as the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister in saying that any ceasefire cannot be a one-sided matter. It needs to be both sides coming to agreement. And we know that Hamas is not interested in a ceasefire. We know that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. And so how do you negotiate with a terrorist organisation? It's not, it's devastating. This whole conflict is devastating, and I want it to be over straight away. But unless we deal in the real world, and unless we recognise the fact that where the world is and Israel is facing a terrorist organisation, then it's a bit delusional to expect anything else.
Yes, indeed. And a Hamas commander has also said just this morning that it's delusional to think that Gaza will be completely free of Hamas. I think he may just have a point there. But what about this ceasefire? Joe Biden also said yesterday that essentially he thinks that Israel is losing international support. So perhaps a ceasefire is the only way forward in the immediate future. And when we throw in the word sustainable there, as was in that statement, Do you wholly agree with that?
Well, what I do support is that there be humanitarian pauses. That last time there was a humanitarian pause, it resulted in many Israeli hostages being released, and it also resulted in vital humanitarian aid being sent to the people of Gaza. And I think that also allowed people to collect their breath, and unfortunately, it probably allowed Hamas to reposition itself and to restock and to prepare for the next round of battle. But that was a cost that, frankly, in our conversations with the Israelis this week, that they were willing to do if it meant getting their own people, their own hostages back from Gaza. So, Laura, this is devastating. The whole thing is devastating. The country is traumatized, and I can't imagine what people in Gaza are going through right now. I mean, it's just, I haven't been to Gaza, and I'm sure it would be absolutely devastating. But what is the pathway through this? There are currently 130 Israelis being held underground. They need to be released. The Israelis today, we met with senior Israeli officials, and they made it clear that if that were the case, if the hostages were released, if Hamas were to surrender, then this war would be over straight away.
Just one final question, Josh. Calls for a ceasefire have been seen and perhaps misconstrued in some circumstances as anti-Israel and anti-Jew. Do you see it that way? Do the Israeli people you've been meeting with this week see it that way?
Well, certainly, what the Israeli people feel is that they were living their life. They were going about their ordinary daily business, and then on the 7th of October at around 6:30 in the morning, 3,500, around 3,000 Hamas highly skilled militants came into the southern parts of Israel and indiscriminately killed civilians. And what Israel is saying is that, imagine if that happened to any other country. Imagine if 1,200 citizens were murdered, were gunned down at a music festival, if there was sexual violence committed against women in any other country. What would the international reaction be? And Israel is saying that they cannot live under that threat. There is currently over 200,000 displaced Israeli people who are not in their homes because it's not safe to be there, either by the threat of Hamas or Hezbollah in the north of Israel. So a ceasefire needs to be seen in those circumstances. What country would accept their civilians being under the threat of a terrorist attack, a constant threat of a terrorist attack, or is Israel able to secure the safety of its people? And I think that's the prism in which this whole conflict needs to be seen through.